So, Berto, what do you know about the allegations against Armie Hammer?
I don't know too much. I saw that it came out, and I was like, wait a minute. There was a headline about cannibalism. And I was like, cannibalism? What the heck? And then I started reading, and it's obviously everything's sensationalized, but it seems like there were some people saying that some exes saying that, yeah, he always fantasized about biting me or eating me or something.
Right. Right. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about Armie Hammer. We're going to talk about the allegations. We're going to talk about Vore Fetish and sexuality. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and I suppose my favorite Armie Hammer movie would be The Social Network. Berto, who are you? Actually, no, I back up. Call Me By Your Name is my favorite Armie Hammer movie.
Makes sense.
Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I'm a big tuna sommelier. And I would go with The Social Network. That's a good choice. Yeah.
What do you know about his career? Like, Call Me By Your Name, Social Network. What else do you know about his career?
It was one of those where I didn't actually know his name for a while, but I had seen him in things. And then when I found out his name, I really didn't believe it. How is that someone's actual real name? It is. It's like there's a guy in politics whose name is Dick Armey. Really, and he's kind of a jerk. And I was like, really, that's your name? It's like, that's his name.
Yeah, there's a football linebacker. His name was Dick Buttkiss. Dick Buttkiss. And it's amazing because as a kid, I would see him. He was a super famous guy. He was in the football world in the 70s, kind of like a Michael Jordan character. And the fact that we never made fun of his name,
that's great.
I think, points to a time in our history when not everything was a dick joke, Whereas today, you can't even say words like moist without people going like, ew, sexual.
Yeah,
it's like, well, what other word, you use the word damp, like, ew. Well, how are you supposed to describe something that is kind of wet?
Yeah, true.
But soon you can't even say wet, right? Because that'll be
it doesn't give you a lot of options, does it?
Yeah. So trigger warning on this episode, by the way, because we're going to be talking about a lot of things that could definitely trigger you if descriptions of intimate partner violence and gore, by the way. So just be very careful and never listen to anything that you could be triggered by in terms of your PTSD. Okay, so let's talk about Armie Hammer. So his full name is Armand Hammer.
Hammer? That's his full name? Yeah. That's insane.
Armand Hammer. Born 1986, son of Mount Auca, California. He's 34 years old right now. He is the son of businessman Michael Hammer, who is a very successful, rich dude.
Wow.
And the great-grandson of oil tycoon Armand Hammer. So he comes from a long string of, So his depiction of the Winklevoss twins was very accurate, and because he sort of holds himself that way.
He can relate to that world, basically.
Yeah, like The Social Network, he definitely seemed like he knew that role.
Yeah,
that elitist old money role. Yeah. Okay, so a couple months ago, January 2021, about a month ago, multiple women came forward about abuse that they had allegedly experienced from him. Most notably, Paige Lorenz. She dated him in 2020, and she was interviewed on Dr. Oz. Did you see this interview at all?
I did not.
So it's an interesting watch, but some highlights is that she said that he used a knife to cut her with the letter A above her genitals, if you will.
Yikes.
Lower genitals. Wait, do we have upper genitals, or is it all just
there's
lower?
There's the upper, there's the west side, east side.
So
there's the lower Manhattan area.
To quote her here, she goes, so on one of these high protocol nights, I don't know what that means, but I think that was a reference to something. So one of these I'm thinking that means one of the sex fetish nights.
The high protocol.
I was tied up and basically looked over my body, and he said to me, "Where should I put my initials on you?" And I did, and I didn't really say anything. And then he just started to carve his initial into me, and I was in a weak position. He was in a position of power. He knew how uncomfortable it made me, but I just never said no. And I think that kind of being coerced into things, and I think that kind of being coerced into things, and we don't want to say no, and we don't want to be undesirable. And I think consent is more complicated than we think, and I've learned that through this. End of quote. So this is one of the biggest allegations against him. And when you hear that quote, Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, it definitely sounds complicated because I didn't hear in that quote that she had been tied against her will to begin with. It sounds like they had some form of arrangement. Maybe they even had a safe word of some sort that was presumably consensual to a certain extent, but that it got beyond the point of comfort. But unfortunately, she didn't feel comfortable drawing a line in the moment, and later regretted that because it was too far for her.
Yeah, it's really complicated because consent in situations like this is complicated.
Yeah.
In that if someone is giving the impression, Armie Hammer in this position, that he will either emotionally control you or emotionally punish you, and he's led you down a road of emotional control, the fact that you didn't overtly say no doesn't necessarily mean that it was consensual, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting the way she put it. She says, he tied me up. So, right, presumably that was consensual. And I mean, in terms of like overtly consensual, whether or not she emotionally had been led down a road of high control is unknown. And then she says, he basically looked over my body and said to me, "Where should I put my initials on me?" And I didn't really say anything. So it's an interesting way to put it. I didn't really say anything. So what does that mean? Does that mean she said something, or does that mean she didn't say much? Did she say nothing, or did she kind of just give a bland answer?
Right.
You know what? So from Armie Hammer's point of view, was there consent? And then he just started to carve his initial into me. From the description, it sounds to me like she is saying he did not have consent. And this is such a drastic behavior that, of course, you would want, very, very firm consent. Proper play, and we'll get into this later, is very, very clear. And there's lots of communication about this from the beginning of are you sure? And you don't ask for consent, especially about something like this in the moment, that you want to make sure. So tonight I want to do this, I want to do that. And is it okay if I do this? And you want the other person to be on board with that, especially with something as drastic as cutting someone's skin.
Yeah, the issue I have is that you are stating this, and I assume that this is because in this community, say S&M community, there are well understood practices or protocols. But I think that this is not well known. It's not something you learn about in school. I didn't take a class for this. So if I got involved with someone on a given night, and I meet someone at a bar, we go to their place, and then we're playing, they're like, I'm into some S&M stuff. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll try it. In that moment, I will not have signed a book that I read with all the rights and consents and things. I will just be going along with it, but expecting that I'm going to be able to say no if I'm uncomfortable. And so that's why I think that there's a lot of unspoken things that might be happening there. I don't know how well versed each of them were or not in, and how much they had discussed this ahead of time. It seems haphazard at best.
Right. Then she says that he licked her flesh wound as it was bleeding. She became worried about it becoming infected, and she claims the brand has not healed properly. She said, quote, "I think he used BDSM as a smokescreen to hurt women and inflict pain on women." And she also said that his mom told her once that Armie had, quote unquote, demonic behaviors. So I just want to point out that that's all allegations. And we don't really know for sure, but sounds credible to me.
Wow.
And usually, almost vast majority of the time when people come forward, if anything, they downplay it. So we can probably trust Paige Lorenz, but, we have to hold out for the possibility of either memories going bad or, ill will or something. Another person, Courtney Vachekovich, told Page Six, a publication, that he allegedly told her that he wanted to break her rib and barbecue and eat it. Berto, what do you think about that?
I mean, that is a deal breaker for me, If I'm hanging out, we're like, oh man, this is so nice cuddling with you right now. How do you like the show? Oh, it's pretty nice. You know what I really would love right now? What, you want a little back rub? No, I just want to break one of your ribs and eat it. Yeah. I mean, we better have been making jokes about it leading up to that. Wow.
Yeah. Now, again, at the end of this episode, we'll get into the fetish side of this world. But it's a pretty interesting thing to say. Interesting pillow talk, if you will.
Even that one. So that one, for example, because it sounds complex, it's not an easy thing to do if you wanted to do it, right? But imagine if it's something that on the surface is less violent, but still violent and more doable. For example, you're sitting there cuddling. It's like, oh man, I'd like to grab one of the kitchen knives and just cut into your finger. What? I would be like, what? And that one would scare me because how do I know that when I fall asleep, they're not literally going to go to the kitchen, grab a knife and cut into my finger?
Right.
The rib one, I guess, would also scare me, but that one would be like, oh, I guess you're going to kill me? I don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why this story is so interesting to the media and to the public is that, one, it talks about a fetish that people don't usually hear about, and two, it's like, what in the world? Because he just seems like such a clean-cut person, and to hear about him essentially talking as if he's literally Hannibal Lecter it's like hearing a story about, Gandalf exists. It's like, wait, Hannibal exists? There's a real one among us? And again, we'll get into the sort of nuances later, but Courtney said, he enters your life in a big way. He's such a captivating person. He has such a presence, and he's aware of that, and he uses it in such a way that most women would think, oh my gosh, this is amazing, but especially young women. And that's kind of the scary part, how good he is at active manipulation and making you feel like he's never felt this way about anyone else. Berto, what do you think about that?
So that sounds interesting because we've heard that pattern with other people we talked about where the manipulation aspect, the grooming.
Like Marilyn Manson.
Yeah. Where you basically say, you bring him into your little world and you make him feel special and you make him feel safe in a sense. And then that opens up to oh, you're going to be my partner in this adventure together. And one thing I was reading after we did the Manson episode was about how there was that sense of going on a journey together. And so I could see that. But see, the hard thing is that sounds perfectly reasonable depending on the context. Right. It's like, yeah, we're going to go on this journey of exploration. What if you get together with someone like me? I actually don't love traveling just to travel. People are like, oh my gosh, I want to go to the Barrier Reef and I want to do it. For me, I'm like, that's great. But let's say I get together with someone and they're like, no. I'm going to show you. I'm going to take you around the world. You know what? This is going to put me out of my comfort zone, but it's a perfectly reasonable thing. It's like, and it might even put my life in danger because it's like, we're going to go skydiving. We're going to go scuba diving. We're going to go doing all these risky things. We're going to drive motorcycles.
Eat each other's ribs.
But that's the thing. Where do you draw the line? Because the one I'm describing is still putting me at risk, more risk than I would normally be at. It's going against what I'm comfortable with, but I'm going along with it. Maybe I even go further than I'd like to because, I wanted to explore the Cayman Islands. I didn't really want to go bungee jumping. I did it because she really wanted me to, but I was uncomfortable the whole time. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. Well, another angle to this is that a lot of relationships or a lot of people are, they really fall in love quick. And so we looked at through one direction, Armie Hammer is this manipulative, Machiavellian person, and it's possible for sure. And, I will tell you that the gestalt of the allegations seems to point towards emotionally manipulative person that isn't necessarily out for treating other people in ways that are consensual. But who knows? But just based on that description of like, someone's talking about their previous partner, and they're like, he has such a way of making you feel like this is just amazing. But then later I figured out that, he was just manipulating me.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that after a relationship ends, that person was just manipulating me, because you break up and you think, well, I think that person never loved me. It certainly seems that way because of the way they treated me at the end. But that's it's a narrative that you're telling yourself, and it might be true, but it might not be true. It's convenient in that moment.
Yeah.
But so at the very least, we might be able to say, well, maybe there's some influence there. But again, when you add up all the allegations, I think we can draw some conclusions about him at the end. But just going on more, Courtney said a lot of things, so just kind of rattling through here. She said, he quickly grooms you in the relationship. He kind of captivates you. And while being charming, he's grooming you for these things that are darker and heavier and consuming. When I say consuming, I mean mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, just everything.
Wow.
She also said that he is a chameleon who transforms into exactly who you need him to be. She also said he sucks out all the goodness you have left. That's what he did to me. I gave and gave and gave until it hurt. She said that his behavior turned obsessive. At one point, they spent 3 weeks together, 24/7. And when they weren't together, he would text her 100 times a day. So again, that behavior is like, well, someone's really into you, or they have preoccupied attachment or something.
Yeah.
It's not pathological to, be obsessive with a relationship. It's maybe not helpful. It's not, functional, but it's not like you're a psychopath necessarily. But it does give a more context, I think, to the way he relates to other people.
Yeah.
She also said, I had this gut feeling the whole time that this was not right. He is not well. She also said that he would drink and do drugs, quote unquote, all the time. She said, you end up doing these things that are very out of character for you, including sex acts. She also said he makes you feel very bad for him. She also said she paid for everything, including gas for his truck, because he was allegedly broke at the time, and still broke maybe. So that's interesting. Why would you still be broke? If maybe drug problem would be a reason there.
Yeah.
Because he's been in a lot of big movies.
Yeah.
Man from U.N.C.L.E., all these other movies. Anyway. Quote, it's a full-time job when you're with him the way that I was. I was trying to catch my breath the entire time I was with him. You're drowning in this dark hole trying to stay afloat. There will be random moments of good that convince you to stay. So it's kind of interesting too. It sounds like he is at least emotionally intense. That when he is into you, he's like really into you. And it's possible that he knows that in order to get his fetish satisfied with these women, he has to really envelop them and slowly introduce things to them instead of actually finding people who actually might be into this kind of thing, which we'll get into later. She said, and this is kind of a kicker, after they broke up, she said that she had panic attacks thinking about what she endured with him.
Whoa.
So that tells you something, right? And she said that she's in therapy now, and that's the key to her recovery from him.
That's intense.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because, with Marilyn Manson, for example, we would hear absolute violence, chasing around with an axe, putting you in a locked room, beating you, not letting you sleep, like real obvious abusive things. Mm-hmm. But here we're hearing obsessiveness, a chameleon, making you feel like you're special, slowly, convincing you to do things that are out of character for you. And, he makes you pay for everything. So I think it's a different profile, at least from the allegations. What do you think, Berto?
Yeah, it seems even some of the worst allegations, well, okay, the cutting part, but I think that like when he's saying, "Hey, can I eat your ribs or whatever?" That is so psychological, right? It's just I'm just asking a question, but it's such a terrifying question, and the constant on engagement.
I want to point out it's constant. It's terrifying to someone who's not used to that.
Sure,
Which we'll get into that later.
Although I guess that's important. But you could say, well, because I could imagine someone trying to explain it, saying like, well, I don't know, we had been going out for 3 months, and I was asking crazy questions from day one, But so I think it is different in that, and we don't know all the details, I guess, but from what we do know, it seems a lot more like a psychological onslaught of words and text messages and some
and
acts.
Charm.
Yeah.
And charm.
Charm, but that still add up to mental anguish and suffering,
Right.
but in a less obvious way. It's less obvious to pinpoint the tail on the donkey, so to speak.
Yeah. And then an anonymous person came forward on Instagram and released a bunch of screenshots, allegedly from him sending messages to various women describing his various sexual fantasies. And I want to point out this is completely unverified. I mean, with the internet today, who knows? But just people are reporting on it. He allegedly asked a partner over Instagram if he could cut off one of your toes and keep it with me in my pocket so I always had a piece of you in my possession. He allegedly said he wanted to bite pieces off of a woman and eat her heart. He allegedly wrote, "I'm 100% cannibal and I want to eat you. That's scary to admit. I've never admitted that before."
Wow.
And he's come forward and said that these messages are faked. So, and they very well could be.
Yeah.
But that's the reporting on it.
So I was reading here that the one about the ribs, well, the request was actually to have the lower ribs surgically removed.
Right.
So that almost, what's odd about that is, in a way, that's scarier, because
it's like, oh, you actually have thought about this.
Yeah. It's worse. It's like, no, here's a doctor's business card. Just give this guy a call. He'll hook you up.
Yeah. His attorney said that these assertions about Mr. Hammer are patently untrue. Any interactions with this person or any partner of his were completely consensual. And his lawyers are currently in the process of subpoenaing Instagram and Facebook to investigate the validity of the screenshots that were presented. So there are other reported kinks from other people to drink blood, cut toes, enslave sexual partners, rape fantasies even. And there are other allegations as well, several like unrelated to the quote-unquote cannibalism, several affairs. He's currently going through a custody battle, I believe, with his wife.
Oh, man.
And there's alleged videos of him using drugs and drinking and driving. And apparently, according to the reporting, he posted videos of himself drinking and driving and using drugs with great abandon on a private Instagram account. Who does that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it makes me wonder if this is true, if he's like, I'm going to upload things to Instagram because then I could share it with other people. Like, why would you have you know what I mean? Or I'm going to have 10 people that have access to my private Instagram account. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why would you... It's one thing to take a video of yourself on your phone. It's another thing to upload it to a private Instagram account.
Yeah, totally.
Things that you would definitely not want out there. I mean, do people not understand that Instagram is another company? It's not owned by you. Like, they, according to their terms of service, I'm guessing if there's a crime that's being committed, they can actually just hand it over to the police.
Even the phones nowadays, that's bad enough in the sense that, most of us have our phones. Like, I have my phone, every picture and video I take gets uploaded to the cloud for backup.
Right.
So,
So if this is true, which we don't know, it would also point to a recklessness, a level of out of controlness that his life has, that he might be a train wreck, right?
Yeah.
That he's not just suffering from a personality of abusing others, but that there's some deep darkness, suffering that he's running from in general, right?
And that's it. Like I'm hearing you say all these things, I'm like, oh man, I'm feeling sad for him, because I'm thinking, if this is real, and what pain is he living with inside? What happened to him? What's going on?
Right. So using his words, again, as with Marilyn Manson, it's like we could just go to Armie Hammer and what he has said as evidence along these lines. In a Netflix interview, he said that his dream dinner guest would be Marquis de Sade. Oh, Berto, who's that?
Wow, Marquis de Sade. He was, the word sadist comes from Marquis de Sade. So he was someone who was very open and active in the 1600s or something, about these ideas of libertarianism, not like in a political sense, just the libertine, just do what you will. And he had elaborate parties where lots of rules were broken, and there were sexual and S&M kind of things that they would do. And I think he wrote down a lot of these very extreme practices and extreme things they would do. There is a movie called 120 or something, 90 Days of Sodom, or 120 Days of Sodom, I forget. It's like loosely based on that.
Yeah, and it's like one of the most disturbing movies of all time, right? Yeah, I've heard it described by people, and I'm just like, oh my God, that sounds traumatic to watch. You haven't seen it?
Oh, I own it. I own it, and I've seen.
What do you mean you own it? Like
I own
on VHS, the DVD? Oh,
the
okay.
DVDs, yes. It's called Salo, and it's 120 Days of Sodom. I was right about it.
So let me just take a guess.
yeah.
You bought it because you were like, oh, it'd be good to watch, because you probably can't find it streaming. And then you keep looking at it and saying, oh, I don't know if I want to watch it.
Exactly what happened, dude. So this was in a period of my life when I was very obsessed with the worst movies out there, and I wanted to really so I found this top 10 list.
Like Irreversible.
And that Irreversible was like number 20 on this list. It was that bad. And so I found this list on some dark website somewhere. And I was like, oh, and then I started buying. I don't know if I bought all of them, but I bought a lot of the ones that were on the list. And Sodom, 120 Days of Sodom was one of them. I started it, and I couldn't get myself to watch it. I've talked about this before. Something definitely changed in me in the last decade, or even maybe started 15 years ago. But where I used to think I was immune to whatever I watched, I'd be fine with it. And then I started realizing that wasn't exactly true, and that there were things that could traumatize me. So
yeah, there are things that I have accidentally seen, or I don't know if it's accidentally, but where there was this one, I always reference this. This is back when video on the internet was brand new. This would have been like around the year 2000-ish. And I can't remember why, but like some website, this is way before YouTube, way before any of this stuff. And it was they're like, click on this video. It's really shocking or something. And it was a really small video. You could, it wasn't full screen. It was this tiny little thing. And I clicked on it, and there's a woman. I'm not even going to describe it, but it's a snuff video. And
oh my God.
And I'm pretty sure it was real. And because it looked real. And that was 20 years ago, and I can still see her face and see her fear. And I'm like, yeah, there's things that, even fictional things, like Irreversible, for example, the midway point of that movie, the last time I watched that was probably it's probably about 15, maybe even 20 years ago. Yeah. Long time ago. And that movie, it'll just pop into my head. I'll be like, oh no. So maybe you never watch it, bro. Maybe just like put it behind glass and say, like, I don't know. Like, what would be the condition?
I never watched.
What would be the condition of break glass and watch?
Break glass
if I
in case
become
of
a psychopath, if I become a psychopath,
yeah. If
I'm about to die in the next couple hours, like,
break glass in case of Armie Hammer eating my rib.
Playboy magazine, he gives an interview. He describes himself as being a dominant lover. He says, I liked the grabbing of the neck and the hair and all that, But then you get married and your sexual appetites change. He also says, and I mean that for the better. It's not like I'm suffering in any way, but you can't really pull your wife's hair. It gets to a point where you say, I respect you too much to do these things that I kind of want to do. End of quote. So that also says something there of he, by definition, he would pull the hair of women that he did not respect. So that also, and that's always the key that everyone has to think about is like, there's nothing wrong with consensual pulling of hair. There's nothing wrong with having a fantasy of wanting to pull someone's hair. There's nothing wrong with having a fantasy of having your hair pulled. There is something definitely wrong with a personality of perhaps misogyny, but definitely like, I want to control other people, whether they want to be controlled or not. And I don't care about other people's feelings. And so, because a more balanced kink person, other than Armie Hammer, would say something like, yeah, I'm a dominant lover and I really love to pull hair and, grab the neck and that sort of thing. And I've been talking with my wife about how we can do those sorts of things in a way that she won't mind, or maybe even she can get into. Or I found another person who actually likes that sort of thing. That's not what he's saying, right? What he's saying is, if you read between the lines, and of course we don't know, but one way of reading between the lines is, because I like my wife, I don't want to do these things with her. I only want to do these things with people that I don't care about, which is concerning, right? Proper kink people will absolutely introduce that kink. If they're engaging in the kink as they're dating, they will definitely introduce it with their spouse because, why would you not? Anyway, Elle Magazine, he said, a former girlfriend tried to stab him while they were having sex. He says, she was like, true love leaves scars, and you don't have any. And you don't have any. And then she tried to stab me with a butcher's knife. Of course, I promptly broke up with her 7 months, but only 7 months later, he says. So this is probably two people made for each other, right? That he was with someone, probably found someone that was into the same sort of things that he was. And if they had read books or gone to workshops, like in Seattle, we have the erotic, we have the, Center for Sex Positive Culture, and they have literal classes on like, here's what consent means, and here's what you do, and here's how you meet people, and here's how you have the conversation, and here's how you manage your own impulses, and here's how you make sure that everything is really consensual and not just implicitly or not just surface level consensual. So anyway, who knows about Armie Hammer, but he clearly in these interviews is confirming that he is into, kinky stuff.
Right.
So the consequences, what happened to him as all this was coming out? What happened to him?
I'm assuming he's been dropped from things.
Right. He was dropped by his talent agency and others. He was cut from many upcoming movies, and he was supposed to be in. So he was on the rise. He was going to be one of those major stars over the next few years. Do you know what things he was supposed to be in, or that he already has been in, and they just haven't released it yet?
The only one I knew that it was a while ago is he was going to play Batman many years ago in a movie that never materialized, but not as a result of this. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But
he was supposed to be in a series about the making of The Godfather, which I actually randomly started watching tonight with my wife.
Oh, wait, the series did come out, but it just doesn't feature him?
It hasn't been shot yet, so he's going to be replaced. And then, I don't know if it's been shot or not, but there's a movie called Shotgun Wedding rom-com with Jennifer Lopez. I believe he's the lead in it. I'm not sure, or it was coming up. Anyway, So those two things were definitely contracted out. So he was going to be in a rom-com with Jennifer Lopez. That would have been a big movie. Armie Hammer, Jennifer Lopez. That would have been, big deal. And that's kind of the beginning of the rise of a star, right? When you start doing all these random things, including a rom-com. And he has several projects that are already ready to be released.
Oh, really? They were done?
Yeah. Death of the Nile, which was a follow-up to Murder on the Orient Express. Did you see this by Kenneth Branagh?
I didn't. I didn't hear.
It was boring, but there was supposed to be another one, and it was probably going to be a huge hit. Death of the Nile. I mean, Murder on the Orient Express was big, but so that's already shot. So that movie's coming out soon,
and he is getting what, dropped from it, or
they don't know.
Refilmed, or
maybe they'll try to edit around him. I don't know.
Kevin Spacey,
or they'll just have a black dot over his head the entire time. Who knows? I'm just joking. They'll probably just release it.
I heard they were going to do a series called Gaslit.
Really?
Yeah, literally, he was going to do a Starz series called Gaslit.
Wow. He had already shot a movie with Taika Waititi. It was going to be his next movie, a sports comedy called Next Goal Wins. Wow. So you know what I mean? You're in a Taika Waititi movie. You're in a Jennifer Lopez rom-com. You're in the next Kenneth Branagh movie, Death of the Nile, and all this stuff is just coming to an end for him.
That is steep.
Does he deserve it, Berto, based on the allegations?
Man, that's a hard one because, I mean, on the one hand, there's these allegations. So I'm going to discount all the Instagram stuff because we don't know. Who knows? Because that would suck if you lose all this because someone said that they sent, but whatever. It definitely sounds like he went too far, but it's also, it's unclear to me when these girlfriends were, but because he was married for 10 years, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, so I think these women were recent and he's going through a divorce. That's just a guess.
Oh, I see. So this isn't when he was 18 or something.
No. That's another element to this, is it seems like maybe he's progressed or he's getting, well, that's another possibility, but that his out of controlness in general is getting worse. Who knows?
Man, that is tough. I mean, it's hard because these are serious allegations, as they were in other cases we've talked about. The only reason that they get a little murkier is because you say, well, wait a minute, you were already tied up, and did he cut your rib? No. Did he eat your hand? No. He said that he would do that? Okay, and that was bad, and so it's really weird.
Right.
I gotta say, I've said this before, I don't love when the whole of the internet jumps on someone, even really bad people. I mean, because I'm a little scared of mob justice as a mechanism in the world. I think mob mentality and mob justice is not the way we rule our society. It's not the way we have laws and we do trials and all these things.
Yeah, I mean, we see the downside of that mechanism in our society these days.
Yes, exactly. Now, at the same time, I do believe in, if you don't want to give someone your money anymore because you don't agree with what they do, that's what you should do. And if you want to make a website explaining why, and then you want to convince others not to give them money, fine. And it's a fine line because that can turn into a mob and blah, blah. In this case, though, it sounds like a lot of it was specific companies, like his management company, the movies, and maybe they were just afraid of reprisal from advertisers and other things.
Right. I think that's the new part of this, is that before, maybe even just 5 years ago, if this happened to someone, well, remember when Pee Wee Herman was caught or allegedly, right? He was caught. He was masturbating at
he was in an adult film theater doing
And in that situation, you're like, well, okay, but a lot of dudes, that's what they're doing there, right?
Yeah, and he, it was illegal. He got arrested. He paid his price.
Yeah, and so his career, I don't know, but from my memory, it was over. He had a comeback, 20 years later after maybe it blew over or people changed their attitudes about that sort of thing. But when that happened, it was, his career came to a screeching halt by the mob and by, I'm sure, all the handlers he had.
And part of it was this unfair association with the fact that a lot of his brand appealed to kids. And then it's like, whoa, we can't have an adult male masturbating in a theater by himself outside of the scope of what he does professionally if his brand is kid-related.
Yeah, and then didn't Eddie Murphy get canceled pre-internet because he propositioned a trans sex worker on the street? Do you remember that?
This sounds familiar. You're right, but I don't remember what the deal was.
Or was that Hugh Grant?
Oh, Hugh Grant. Or Hugh Grant was the guy. Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yes, he was married to the gal in not Wayne's World, in the other Mike Myers movie.
Yeah, the Spy
It's
Who Shagged
groovy,
Me.
baby.
Yeah.
Shagadelic.
Yeah.
The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah.
What is that movie? Austin Powers. Thank you.
Well, it's the Spy Who Shagged Me. Isn't that one of the...
Spy Who Shagged Me. Yeah.
Anyway.
But anyways, yeah. So he was married to Elizabeth Hurley, and then he had an indiscretion with, and then his career didn't fully finish. It was just, he had
I don't... Eddie Murphy and Hugh Grant and...
They had a breather.
Yeah. Or it was just pre-internet or I don't know. But so should Armie Hammer be canceled for this, Berto? What do you think?
Oh, and sorry, and by the way, there are also differences between, like, for example, okay, so you were masturbating, you got caught by the cops and you got arrested. Okay, fine. But you didn't abuse someone, you didn't, inflict harm on others. You
Right.
just, it's like, okay, fine.
It's kind of weird. We have this gauge in our mind. If I had like a gauge from 1 to 100, say Harvey Weinstein's at, like 98 or something.
Yeah.
Where you just have decades of like full-on violent rape and full-on coercion and using power and money and movie roles to get women to, do stuff with him. And, just dozens and dozens of victims. So we have that.
Pee Wee Herman's at a 1.
Pee Wee Herman's, at some sort of, put him at like a 10 because it's like, technically speaking, it's a crime to do that in public.
Yeah.
And he shouldn't be doing that. Like, there's nothing wrong with masturbating. There's nothing wrong with looking at porn, but don't do it in public, dude. Like,
At an adult movie theater.
Yeah, right. So there's that.
While they're watching porn.
Yeah, while everyone else is doing it. Yeah.
While everyone else is doing it.
Give him a 5, I guess, is the thing. So what number on the scale from 1 to 100 would you put Armie Hammer at this point? Given our impression, I guess, because, we don't have the full story, but given your impression, where is he on that scale?
Based on only what I know and what these descriptions are, I would probably go like 35.
Yeah.
But the thing that makes it hard, and I think it makes it hard for so many people, is as soon as you see the word cannibalism,
right,
it like adds 40 points.
Exactly. That was my point, was that if you just forget about the cannibal fetish, which we'll get into in a second, and you just think about emotional control and, maybe manipulation, maybe very intense, maybe not such a nice person, and you think about the way he convinced people to do things they didn't really want to do and scared people, 35. But then you add the fact that there's sex and quote unquote cannibalism. Now you're looking at a situation where he's literally like seen as maybe even worse than Harvey Weinstein in the public eye, because when you add cannibalism and sex, then you're really amping up your cancel quotient, if you will.
Yeah.
Your cancel index.
Your Chianti index.
Your Chianti index. Okay, so let's take a break, and when we get back, let's dissect this fetish in a bad phrasing. Berto, what do you say?
Let's do it.
Hey, deserving listeners, as you know, I'm constantly recommending that people go to therapy. We all need therapy from time to time. One of the options available that is definitely worth checking out is BetterHelp.com. So if you're looking for a therapist, I would give it a try by going to BetterHelp.com/Kirk. Make sure you use the /Kirk because you get 10% off your first month, and it helps us out. I get a lot of emails from you saying that you're looking for a therapist. As you watch these videos, I know many of you have been motivated to find your own therapist. But I know it can be really hard to find a good one to work with. Like I said, one of the options available to try is BetterHelp.com/Kirk. And you should know that this service is available to clients worldwide, which is amazing. I've been told that you can start communicating with your therapist in under 24 hours. You can message with your counselor anytime. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. And I've been told that it's often less expensive than in-person therapy. So go to BetterHelp.com/Kirk to get 10% off your first month of therapy today. All right, Berto, if Hannibal Lecter were to ask the listeners to become a patron. Yeah, you've been waiting for this moment for decades, by the way.
I've been waiting for this moment for all my life.
So if Hannibal Lecter asked the listeners to become patron of the podcast, what would he sound like?
Hello, listener. I have been watching you, and I see that you think you know what's happening. But I want to ask you, go back to the beginning. First, principles. What are you made of? Ah, yes, flesh. And what does flesh need? It needs a frame. But that frame can't move without a brain. And that brain can go bad. Unless you subscribe and patronize Psychology in Seattle. But worry not, if you don't, I have a dinner invitation waiting for you. You will be my special guest. And don't worry about the wine. I will provide.
It's kind of weird how Chianti is the perfect Hannibal Lecter wine. You know, it would have sounded so much different. He was like, it's, you know, with fava beans, it's perfect with a good Sauvignon Blanc. You know, it just doesn't. Chianti just sounds like a knife. Chianti, it sounds like a weapon.
It's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah. Okay, so answer me this, Berto. Has Armie Hammer been accused of eating human flesh?
No.
He drank, or he licked some blood, but he hasn't eaten any human flesh. So we just have to be clear that there's perhaps, and the reason why I'm going down this road is we have to delineate between fetish and intent.
Yeah.
Like with Marilyn Manson, we delineated between BDSM and abuse. According to the allegations, he seemed very much abusive and not in the world of BDSM, because BDSM is consensual. So has he eaten human flesh? No. Is he a cannibal? Is there evidence that he's a cannibal?
No.
Has he murdered anyone? Evidence.
Nope. Not that we know.
Is he abusive?
It sounds like there's evidence that he was, whether he intended to or not. But yes, victims felt abused.
Right. So that's what we're looking at. Potential emotional abuse. You could argue physical once you break someone down and then you involve them in your fetish.
You cut them.
So let's go into the fetish here. So what fetish does he have? What world? It's actually not BDSM. What world is he in?
Oh, sadism?
No.
It's just sadism? No, it's not.
I mean, that's
Okay.
BDSM, right?
Yeah, I guess so. It's gastronomic.
Good. Well, it's called Vore Fetish.
Oh,
like carnivore. Or AKA vorophilia.
Vorophilia.
So do you know the definition of this?
To vor is to eat.
So it's actually pretty complicated, and there's a lot of different corners to this, but it's an erotic desire to consume or be consumed by another person or creature, or watch people consume other people or creatures. Again,
wow.
consent. This fetish in the healthy world is a whole world of consent. It's perhaps a subset of BDSM, and it's not a very common kink, but common enough that there are entire subreddits to this, for example, Vore subreddit. So the elements to this are kind of interesting, and you see this in the way the allegations are about Armie Hammer. Some of them you see and some of them you don't. So one of the things that often is present with this Vore fetish is that they want to fantasize about eating people whole, or being eaten whole, or thinking about someone else being eaten whole. So if you look at the porn for this fetish, because there's always porn, it's often cartoons, and you'll see like a minotaur or something, and the minotaur has eaten a bunch, like 5 naked girl nymphs, the fairies of the forest, and they have a sort of cutaway that you can see into a stomach, and you see all these naked nymphs in the belly of this minotaur, and that's a huge turn on for the Vore Fetish people.
I see. That's what I call a Friday night, personally, but okay.
Yeah. From which angle? Are you the nymph or are you the minotaur?
I am the cinematographer.
Or are you the fork?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're saying like these fetishes, meaning they just fantasize about it, they don't actually like consume
Yeah.
flesh? Okay.
Yeah. In the same way BDSM is fantasies about whipping and controlling and or being
But they
whipped.
do actually whip a little bit, you know?
Yeah, but it's
Put
not
people in cages.
It's not in the fantasy they might be fantasizing, like, just take BDSM for example. While they're being, and this is a big part of it, is while they're being whipped and they're tied up and they might actually be unable to get out of it, they are fantasizing about how it's real, like they're really underneath someone's thumb. And if the less sort of, and it's not everyone's this way, but the less believable it is to their subconscious or to their pretend mindset, the less exciting it is, right? So you have to really uphold that space. It's sort of like maybe more relatable would be a couple is doing role play, like I'm the fireman and I just came in through the window, and oh, there's a lady who is caught in the fire. Well, I need to have sex with that woman first before I save her. And the more the two people believe this role play, the more exciting it is. The woman will literally in her mind go, yes, he is a fireman. Yes, he I don't want it, but I kind of do. And the guy is like, yes, I am a fireman and I don't know this woman. And we're very good at pretending. We're very, very good. And we're very good at believing pretend. When we watch movies, we know it's pretend, but we get into it. It moves us to tears and anger and love feelings. And so the play is real. So with Vore, how do you achieve that is the question, which I'll get into later.
And the other thing that is in my mind is, where should we draw the line between, hey, these fantasies are great, and you might want to seek help?
Well, the line is if it's causing dysfunction in your life or others.
Well, yeah, but what if it's like, okay, that might be fair. The examples I was thinking about is the people, the two dudes that shot up Columbine. They fantasized about it constantly, and they planned and they fantasized. Now you could say, what if they had only ever fantasized about it? And then at some point someone's like, and this is before all those shootings, so someone just refers them to a therapist, and then they're like, what? We're just fantasizing. We can't fantasize. Like, they're stop police now. And so then they conclude, well, okay, maybe it's fine. They're just fantasizing about it. And at some point they don't do anything. So they actually just go on with their lives. They grow up and they're fine. But maybe we needed to have that check anyways, because others don't just fantasize. They actually go and shoot up the school.
Right. So the very few individuals who are into the Vore Fetish, who actually will harm other people, then those people need to be, sanctioned or helped or whatever we say, or not encouraged, I suppose.
And how do you know ahead of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. But the key is does this person have empathy for, are they a psychopath?
Yeah.
Do they have empathy for other people? Because that's the kicker, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
If you are, just take a more mundane thing where you have a guy who watches a lot of porn and he has a girlfriend or wife or a husband, and he watches a lot of porn and he masturbates to it. And what he's doing in his mind is he's fantasizing about having sex with these other people. That's, part of the porn watching experience. Not for everyone, but that's common.
Right.
And you would say, you would add the same question. It's like, well, at what point is doing this actually harming the marriage because he is sort of fantasizing about something that would destroy his marriage, for him to actually, if they don't have a open relationship, for him to actually have sex. But of course you say, well, I mean, there's a huge chasm between looking at porn and fantasizing about having sex with other people and actually doing it. Well, the same goes with Vore. There's a huge chasm between thinking or fantasizing about Vore and actually killing people and eating them.
Right.
Or even controlling them and cutting them without their consent. There's a huge chasm there. The vast majority of Vore fetish individuals are, they have empathy. So even though they might have an impulse, I suppose, to do things, and that's even debatable, they know not to because they don't want to alienate anyone. If anything, most people with Vore fetish don't bring it up in any relationship because they're so ashamed of it and they're so stigmatized around it because it is such a rare, really any kink. I mean, even BDSM people are afraid to talk about it, let alone Vore people. There are people who are ashamed of position change, like I want to change our position away from this one that we always do, and people are ashamed of that. So imagine so the vast majority of people with Vore, it's an underground thing for them, and they're definitely not acting on it.
I can see it like, wait a minute, are you at 15 degrees right now? Yeah, I just thought we'd try something different. 12.5 degrees, I told you. So now,
let me get my protractor.
Hannibal Lecter, what?
Let me get my protractor.
Is Hannibal Lecter actually empathetic, if you think about it? He's a little empathetic, right? He cared about Clarice.
Right. Well,
He
that's
only
why
kills the bad people.
Right. That's why that show is, and a lot of them, they don't really present psychopaths accurately. Could it possibly happen that someone exists like that? Yeah, but that's not the typical. They're more like the guy that flung the goo in her face,
Exactly.
So also, you can be consumed in Vore fetish through any orifice, not just the mouth, and you can use your own imagination with that. Victims often survive being eaten in the Vore fetish fantasy, meaning that they're whole and they live in the stomach,
Oh, interesting.
And that's what I meant earlier with like the Minotaur and the nymphs. The nymphs are like, oh, we're stuck. It's kind of a sexual assault fantasy in that way as well. It's like, I'm gonna eat you and you're not gonna be able to get out. Victims often survive being eaten. Victims sometimes want to be eaten. That's the other thing. Is like, oh, please eat me. Mm-hmm. There's often a focus on the distended belly after you consume someone. Also to make someone else feel part of you and vice versa. So part of the reason why you might want to fantasize this is like you're trying to make someone part of you, or you want to be made part of someone else, which, symbolically makes a lot of sense. So this is related to BDSM, humiliation fetish, furries is another thing that kind of overlaps with Vore stuff, and another kink that's called unbirthing, which is, going back inside, if you will.
The interesting thing for me growing up Catholic is that there is this key ritual where you consume the flesh and drink the blood of the main figure in your religion. And that is seen as a holy thing. That is seen as a exalted thing.
Yeah, it's for those who didn't grow up in a church, it is explicit. Yeah. Every time you do communion, you will say this, the minister holds up the wine and says, or the grape juice in my case, in my church, this is the blood of Christ. They don't say we're going to do communion. They're like, because in the Bible, it has it all written out. Yeah. Jesus said to his disciples, this is my blood and the bread is my flesh. And
we were taught in our catechism, that through the process of consecration, there's this transmutation that physically takes place, and that it literally becomes blood and flesh. And then I remember someone asking, then how come it tastes still like, it's like, no, that's immaterial. The point is it literally becomes flesh and blood.
Right. And they will use in English the word flesh, eating the flesh of Christ. Yeah. Not even the body sounds a little bit more distant, like they say flesh. And so, I was thinking about that too, that we have a lot of interesting cultural elements of cannibalism. While we're on the religious discussion, there's many other religions and mythology that involves the eating whole of other creatures. For example, in the Greek mythology, if I remember right, Zeus's father, Kronos, ate Zeus's siblings, and Zeus had to kill him and to release all the people, otherwise known as Saturn and Jupiter. But so there are many phrases in the English language also that relate to sex and consumption of human flesh. Can you think of any phrases, just like things people would say in conversation that would...
Well, sexually, you would say eating out. Okay. I'm going to eat you out.
Right.
It's like, well, you're not really eating, but I guess you're sort of like, okay, so that's something.
Right.
And then you might say devoured, like, oh, you devoured him. Or I guess that's not, I don't know.
Well, I have the following quotes here of people, the things that people say. When you describe a hot person, think about words that people use that are akin to food. Like
smoking. It's like a smoking.
No, like food. Like taste.
Oh, yummy.
Right, that person's yummy.
Tasty. Yeah.
Sweet.
Scrumptious.
Sweetie pie. Why do we call our spouses sweetie pie?
Pie. A pie is something you eat, and sweetie is like sweet. There's sweetness there.
Yeah. Juicy.
What do you call your significant other? Salty potato. Come here, my salty potato.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more a savory person, Come here, you piece of pizza. Yeah. Another phrase you might hear is, that person looks good enough to eat.
I want to be called a saffrony quiche.
Another is the way to a man's heart is through his stomach.
Right.
Which, I guess makes more literal sense.
Like you have to literally go through his stomach.
Yeah. So what about songs about connecting sex or sexuality?
I want to eat your leg. Oh, wait, that wasn't the lyric.
That's like an unknown German version.
Yeah, like the old Grimm's fairy tales, they're all super graphic and bloody. The old Beatles songs were like that too.
Yeah, the original.
I don't know.
There's a Duran Duran song.
One of Hungry Like a Wolf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the lyrics go, I'm on the hunt, I'm after you.
Yeah.
Mouth is alive, your juice is like wine, with juices like wine, and I'm hungry like the whole song is about chasing down a woman and wanting to eat her.
Yeah.
What
about Eat It by Weird Al?
What about Hall & Oates? There's a song by Hall & Oates about cannibalism. One of their big ones.
Which one? Only come out at night.
Yeah.
Mind over matter. What is the lyric though? What's the? Whoa, here she comes. Oh, a man eater, right?
Yeah.
Man eater. Watch out, boy, she'll chew you up. Chew you up. It's literally in the lyrics.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you hear these things,
she's a man eater.
So when you think about Armie Hammer at first, you're just like, whoa, what a freak. And then you hear about Vore Fetish, and then you actually look at our culture, and you're like, wait a second, is it that aberrant? We have this stuff throughout our religion, throughout the way we talk about hot people. It's in our songs.
Warrant. She's my cherry pie.
Yeah, I mean, really, right? Like, what? She's a pie? Like, because it kind of makes sense, because when we eat things, particularly good things that we like, it's ecstasy. It feels good. It's like, oh, this cherry pie is so good. And sex isn't that far away from that feeling, right?
Right.
What about children's stories that we tell our children?
Yeah, Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah. Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood. Lots of eating in that one. Snow White and many others.
Yeah.
So just some famous stories of other famous cannibals that are in real life. Who's the most famous of all, Alberto?
Well, there was Ed Gein.
Okay.
And then there was, I'm obviously missing something very obvious here.
Yeah, the obvious one.
Oh yeah, of course. Our Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and this is actually, I did a whole deep dive on Jeffrey Dahmer if you want to listen to
Yeah.
it a year or two ago. And learning about Vore Fetish changed my view of him. And I remember thinking at the time, I think he wants to eat people, because the way he talked about it, well, like one quote, it says that he said, "It made me feel like these people were a part of me. It gave me a sexual satisfaction to do that." And because on one hand, you look at his behavior and you're just like, well, that's like really sick. And it is.
Yeah.
It's terrible. But from his point of view, he loved these people and he wanted to make them a part of him.
Right.
And you could consider his behavior as a very far aberrant version of a variation among human sexuality, which is the Vore Fetish. That you take someone that has it in an extreme way and also lacks empathy and also doesn't mind killing and harming other people, and then you get someone like Jeffrey Dahmer. What often gets focused on with people like Armie Hammer and Jeffrey Dahmer is that, oh, they're cannibals. Well, no, Jeffrey Dahmer was a psychopathic murderer who also happened to have a Vore Fetish, is the thing people should say. Armie Hammer, if the allegations are accurate, he's not a cannibal. What he is an abusive partner who just happens to have a Vore Fetish. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we need to couch
and
it
who
in
might
that.
anyways, but yeah.
Yeah, we don't know, but because there are plenty of people out there with Vore fetishes exactly like Armie Hammer does, and they don't harm anyone. So we need to uncouple these associations, because the vast majority of people with Vore fetishes don't do anything, and they don't even emotionally harm anybody. You know what I mean?
There's something, I think, visceral for so many of us about thinking of someone eating human, right? I think maybe it was developed just naturally because it turns out that, if species, not all of them, but if species are consuming their own, it can lead to some problems, medically, because they can consume the types of proteins that could develop into brain problems and things like that. So maybe over time, it just became inherent in some class of animals to like avoid consuming the flesh of their own kind. And then as humans evolved and got like sophisticated, we, in addition to that, had all these stories around it. And so then it became really disgusting as a society to think about it. It's like, that's the worst thing you could imagine, or one of the worst anyways. And so, yeah, as soon as you hear cannibalism attached to anything, it multiplies the horror times 10.
Right.
And yeah.
Because there's misunderstanding about it, really, in my view. Did Jeffrey Dahmer do something horrible? Yes. Did Armie Hammer potentially do something horrible? Yes. But if we, take someone who, let's just change Armie Hammer's story and say that he would convince women to just have missionary sex with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he also would do things emotionally to the women that made them feel afraid and made them feel used or not heard or coerced or something, then the story would probably feel a lot different to the public, right?
Missionariist.
Right. So I think that's the key here, is that because of our kink shame and our kink phobia, this elevates it from a 35 to a 75 on the scale.
I mean, so two things. One, just even the fact that you were using the words Jeffrey Dahmer and then Armie Hammer in the same sentence is an illustration. Because, why would you ever put the same? But the other thing that I do think about is these phobias, this isn't surprising. Of course we have these phobias because this whole notion of predilection and freedom in sexuality and stuff is very, very new. And it's still tricky. There are gray areas. We're not quite sure. Like, where is it too much? Like I was saying in a different episode, I'm not sure that just fantasizing about everything constantly is conducive to mental health. Like, I don't know where those lines are. If I obsessively think about something over and over and over, it might become a problem, but I don't know how much and what kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's another famous case, Armand Muse, a German man. He killed and ate a male partner who consented to it.
I heard about this. Yeah, he advertised online or something. He was like, I want someone. And the other person was like, yeah, that's my fantasy.
Yeah. And he could only experience attachment when the other person was physically inside of him, inside of his belly. So, yeah, interesting. Very strange case, obviously, very rare. Two individuals who, I guess you can call that consensual. I don't think we need that in our society. But, okay, so
by the way, that's the part where consent gets weird too, because you can have someone as an adult who said, I'd like to be put to sleep, right? Like put to death. But then you have to analyze, like, well, were they capable of making that determination? Were all their capabilities, were all their senses there? Right. And we've had famous cases about that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So going to the subreddit, and at the end here, again, trigger alert. If this is upsetting, just check in with your body around this and don't listen if it's triggering, because it very well could be. This person says, I have a Vore Fetish, and I am not afraid to be open about it. I also love anime. I've never gotten to experience Vore in an anime format before, and I am 100% unaware if Vore-themed shows even exist. The only anime I have seen with even a single Vore scene is in an early Naruto episode when Naruto was eaten by a giant snake. But God, seeing him slowly slide down the snake's throat got me rock solid, sorry. I am in need of any potential information to aid me in my quest. So that's one person's request for anime Vore material. This person posted, and a lot of people replied to it. I thought it was pretty illustrative. This person says, my boyfriend likes Vore, and are there ways that I can satisfy his fetish? One time I was sitting in his lap, and I had an oversized hoodie on. I put the hoodie over his head and upper body, and he was trapped in the hoodie. And he really liked it. Any advice would be much appreciated. And then someone wrote in and said, use a sleeping bag and role play that it's your gut and you got him trapped in it. So, Berto, when you hear that, what do you think?
Okay, so I have two thoughts. One is that these sound like fairly reasonable people saying, hey, I'm just being honest here. This is what I like to fantasize about, but, I'm not killing someone. Or I like fetishes like these, and then I like anime. And then in the other case, it's like I have a relationship, and I'm obviously not trying to hurt my partner, but what could we do? And the descriptions sound pretty innocuous. The other part of me goes, I'm still curious, like where is it coming from? Like what triggers that desire, those thoughts? And it's
sexuality is weird,
to know.
And we'll never probably ever know. Humans are extremely varied and adaptive, but certainly, as I said, there's a hypothesis that eating things is a way to satiate yourself, and of course having sex is a way of satiating yourself in the way that some people have excrement fetish, right? There's a certain pleasure of excreting. And also when we were very young, we took in mother's milk, and
that's true.
To do that is and at the same time, we're very much being loved, hopefully, and being taken care of and nurtured. And also we are absorbing our mother's personality and her, I guess I shouldn't gender the person who's, because it could be any gender. So we're taking in the food of our caretaker, and we're also taking in their love, and we're also, and it fills our belly.
Yeah.
And we're also taking in who they are as a human being. We're taking in their language. We're taking in their mannerisms. We're taking in their values. And in a way, you're eating parts of your parent. You're eating their body. That's what it is. That's what breastfeeding is anyway. You're literally eating part of their body.
Right.
And so given our mushy brain between our ears, you could see how it could become associated with sex in that way.
That mushy part is the part that I struggle with. For example, imagine you're the president of the United States and you have a kink. Your kink is you want to pretend with your partner, the first guy of the nation or whatever, you want to pretend that you're going to set off the nuclear football, like you're going to trigger a nuclear war. But that you're just pretending. You're not grabbing the actual nuclear football. But that's your kink. Like you love pretending. Oh, here we go. Nuclear destruction. Go. Okay, here's the thing. I don't want the president pretending, role playing that constantly. That doesn't sound safe at all. Like I would want someone to be like what's happening? Let's talk to someone here. That's not safe. Because in my mind, I'm like,
yeah,
I don't want you to even come anywhere close to thinking that that's something you should experiment with.
Yeah, and there is an association with entertaining one's fantasies and behavior, but it's a far cry from, let me give you a more down-to-earth example that is very common, which is someone has a gun in their house, a shotgun for hunting or a handgun for whatever. And when they're online, all they do is play shooters. And they shoot people, and they love that game. They like the feeling of it. Is there something wrong? Is there something risky about that person? Are they going to grab their gun in their closet and kill a bunch of people? Research shows extremely unlikely. So again, there's a vast chasm between fantasy and play and actual behavior.
Fair enough. Now, what about this scenario? You own the gun. You have a scope. You get pleasure from aiming down through your window. You live in this apartment building and you like aiming at people, but you're not going to shoot them. It's just that you really get off on it. You look through the scope and you imagine what it would be like. And you just, oh my gosh, it's so fun.
Yeah.
But you don't do it.
Yeah, it's a good example. And I see the difference. And I suppose case by case, right? But just going over some other suggestions, this person says, lick your boyfriend. Hold him down and lick his face while you tell him how good he tastes and how you can't wait to get him in your belly. So for those listening, if you don't have this fetish, including you, Berto, you might be like, what? But, that turns some people
sort
on.
of. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, you know what? Like, we kiss. And kissing, it's like you're imbibing each other's saliva, and it's like pretty sloppy normally and stuff. And so what's that about, right? Like,
yeah. It reminds me of the thought experiment of like, okay, you're French kissing for 5 minutes. You know that you're consuming a lot of their saliva, right? And you're like, yeah, of course. Okay, if your partner spit into a spoon, would you drink it?
No.
Yeah, but it's somehow
right.
It's somehow it's like no.
Great point.
Or another, or even a better one. On a given day, you swallow your spit all day long. Sometimes you even consciously do it. It's like, oh, something's kind of building up and you just swallow it.
Yep.
Okay, spit into a spoon and then drink it. As soon as it leaves the body of the person, it's now suddenly like disgusting. Now, maybe a Vore person, another person says, stomach noises are a big one, and there are 2 ways I use to get them louder. First, you can swallow a bunch of water, but make sure you gulp down some air with it. It makes for a super sloshy belly. And then another comment, because they want to listen to the belly. So if the
right.
Second, if you really want to make it loud, get a microphone, pair it up with a speaker or some headphones, then let him listen to it, preferably either in the dark or in the bath. Let me out. Another person says, stroke his tummy and say something like, someone is in there now, in this pleasant warm place. And depending on the preferences, you can say that a character of some sort feels very relaxed and good in his stomach, or the character that you identify is now gradually being digested and his nutritious substances will soon fill you, your boyfriend, with life energy.
Okay, by the way, so 2 thoughts. One is, we do have this dichotomy of like, we do actually, most people eat animals that are dead. Sometimes they're not that dead. Like, people eat raw stuff quite often, around the world, I mean. And those are creatures, maybe they were recently alive. Sometimes they're still wiggling. So that's a thing that actually happens. Number one. Number two.
Yogurt, you're eating live
Yogurt
cultures.
has a lot of bacteria. Yeah, exactly. But then the other thing that comes to mind is everything you're describing so far sounds pretty safe to me. Like, in other words, if I were with a partner that had this fetish, but these were the descriptions of the thing, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds fine.
Right.
I mean, I'm not into it, but
so
that's
contrasting
fine.
this with what Armie Hammer was doing, and we're talking
Exactly.
about something different.
And the key for me is that when I think cannibalism and all these things, I'm thinking, yes, definitely of like, I'm going to slice a little part of your thigh and put it in my tongue and wiggle it around. Where I'm like, whoa. Like, I need that. I need the blood that goes in there. I need the flesh that goes with that.
Right.
Like, that's not something you can just do.
Right. So what we're looking at least in the descriptions about Armie Hammer, is someone that either doesn't care or doesn't know how to care about the feelings of another person. We hear from the Reddit person who is saying, my boyfriend, I know my boyfriend has a Vore Fetish. But according to the way she described it, he's never asked for anything because he's ashamed, probably.
Right.
And so she's asking Reddit, what can I do for him? Because he doesn't tell me what he wants, probably because he's so ashamed. That's the typical Vore Fetish lifestyle, is secret porn, really, and never telling any partner about it. So what Armie Hammer is doing is, seemingly from the allegations, he is finding women who he likes and is attracted to, and then slowly, and maybe not really respecting them and not really wanting to be with them long term, the way that, because in that one interview, he's like, well, I can't do these things with my wife because I respect her. Right. So he finds women that he doesn't really care that much about, and then proceeds to break them down emotionally, maybe. Again, based on the allegations, seems possible. Because he knows he wants to do these very sadistic Vore things with them to get off. But he also knows that they probably aren't going to like it, so he can't ask people who are into this sort of thing, and he can't explain it beforehand. So he quickly kind of bum rushes people with these things. Like the way that they described it, it's like one night he's like a little rough, and she's like, okay, that wasn't so bad. The next night it's like, okay, how about we do a little tie-up stuff? And it's like, okay, that's not so bad. And then that goes on for a while, and then it's a knife is displayed. Okay, that's not so bad. And then the knife is now carving a letter into my body. And every step of the way, he's not like, by the way, I'm really into this kind of thing. Is it okay if we do this play tonight? Like, there's seemingly no conversations around that. So that's what we need to be focusing on. Not that he's a cannibal, but that he is doing things that seemingly, from the allegations, are not consensual and might even be manipulative emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Final word, Berto.
Well, I have opened my appetite and my eyes. I still probably will choose Chianti for my outings personally, but it's opened me to other wines out there. I think, I don't know, I wish the victims the best, and I hope that it is something that either he can overcome through therapy, or maybe that this isn't as bad as it's portrayed and somehow he can recover his career. It's really hard, and we're always on the outside of these stories. It's very rare when you have all the data just laid out in front of you. So I don't want to pass too strict of judgment in any case like these, because, I don't know. But from what I've heard, I wish the victims the best. That sounds quite disturbing and tragic, and I hope that he finds some help.
Yeah, ditto. I'm reminded of a video I have of you and me in Vancouver, Canada. Mm-hmm. And I'll cut this out later if you want me to. But a woman...
no, you don't have to cut this out. This was hilarious.
Maybe she had a Vore Fetish.
She might have actually. Okay. We were sitting there in a store buying some falafel or something.
I think it was pizza. But
Pizza.
anyway,
Yeah. And I'm sitting there. We were, let's just say we had had a couple beers or
it
whatever.
was late night. It was probably like
Late
4
night.
in the morning.
We
and
had
it was-
already been dancing like 3 times.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there kind of like doing a little dance in place. And then I'm kind of looking over at this gal and she's giving me what I at first thought was like the stink eye. Like she's kind of looking at me like she can't figure me out or something. And then she just like gets right up to me and licks my cheek.
Yeah, like full
from
tongue.
the bottom to the top. Yeah, like
Yeah.
just licks the side of my
Yeah,
face.
not the tip of the tongue, but like the full
full
breadth
tongue.
of the
Full
tongue.
tongue.
Just and I have it all on video, by the way.
I was like, huh, what? Did I just get vored?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe one day we'll release those videos.
Yes.
All right, Berto, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and kink wisely because
You deserve it.